It was mile 23 of the city marathon, and the sun had become merciless. Not hot like summer. Worse. It was dry, scraping, exposing. The pavement shimmered under the heat, turning the final miles into a slow, private kind of agony. Most runners had stopped smiling miles ago, now leaning forward like shadows trying to outrun themselves. Among them, a stoop-backed man shuffled. Walter, number 7,461. His name hadn't been announced when the race started. Nobody was following his progress on the tracking app. No local news camera was trained on him. But he was there, every tendon tight, every breath shaky, the frayed edges of his old sneakers slapping the asphalt like they, too, wanted to give up. One foot, then another. He wasn't racing for glory, just to finish something, anything. And then it happened. 20 feet ahead, a young woman in a coral tank top wobbled like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Her legs folded awkwardly beneath her. She crumpled, face first, onto the road with a sound that was too soft for how hard the fall looked. Her bib number twisted under her arm, partially torn. People saw her go down. They saw and swerved. A few frowned. One even shouted over their shoulder, "Medic at the next station." But no one stopped. Everyone had trained too hard, come too far. 3 miles left. The finish line was close enough to taste. Walter's eyes flicked between her body and the distant banner. His cracked lips moved around a breathless prayer. He'd promised himself he would finish. Just this once. Not for anyone else. He had no one to tell. But for him. One clean ending. But the girl wasn't moving. Not twitching. Not groaning. Not even trying to push herself up. Something about the angle of her leg. It was all wrong. Walter's next step faltered. Then stopped. His knees bent slow, like old branches creaking under winter snow. He knelt beside her, his breath coming hard now. Not from exertion, but from something worse. "Fee, miss? Hey, hey." His voice was dry. He touched her shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. Her face was flushed, lips pale. Her pulse, when he found it, fluttered against his fingertips like a moth caught in a jar. Walter raised one hand and waved at the river of motion rushing past. "She's down," he called. One runner gave a thumbs up and kept going. Another shouted, "They'll send someone." But no one slowed. The sound of feet pounding the road drowned out the urgency in his voice. He stayed anyway. Minutes passed. He shaded her face with his body. When her breathing hitched, he adjusted her position the way he remembered from a class decades ago. Finally, after a lifetime disguised as 10 minutes, 2 race medics jogged up. Their radios crackled. "We've got her," one said. They gently rolled her onto a stretcher. As they lifted her away, one of them glanced at Walter. "You okay, sir?" He nodded. "I didn't do much." But that wasn't true. He had done everything that mattered. He stood slowly. His knees protested. His hips screamed. The road ahead was empty now, no pack to carry him forward. Only silence and the faint echo of the finish line crowd too far away to notice his return to motion. Still, Walter walked. The last 3 miles were lonelier than any he'd ever known. No cheers, no music, no one waiting with open arms. Just a few volunteers packing up plastic water bottles, and a bored teenager clicking the final finishes through with a mechanical, "Congratulations." Walter crossed the line, and no one looked up. He didn't mind. He hadn't run for applause. And maybe that's why the moment should have ended there, wrapped in quiet anonymity. But it didn't. Because 2 days later, at precisely 7:14 in the morning, someone knocked on Walter's front door. Not with the hesitance of a stranger, or the politeness of a delivery. This knock was direct, intentional, as if the world had been watching all along and had finally decided to knock back. And nothing in Walter's quiet life would ever be the same again. Walter didn't look like a man who'd ever run a marathon. At least not to the cashier who waited patiently while he counted out nickels and dimes from a coin purse worn soft by years of use. $6.82, he muttered, forehead creased, breath slightly shaky. The eggs and the small loaf of bread on the counter weren't luxury. They were math. Behind him, someone in line sighed audibly, but Walter didn't flinch. He gave a tired smile when the cashier offered to cover the missing 30 cents. "No need," he said, pulling out a weathered coupon like a magic trick. "I came prepared." He always did. At home, which was more of a glorified box with a door, faded siding, one squeaky step, and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. Walter moved through his routines like someone carefully managing their own dignity. He boiled tea using a dented kettle, taped the same cracked corner of his window, turned the thermostat just high enough to keep the cold from biting his fingers. On the wall above his little kitchen table hung a photo of a younger man with sharper shoulders and a bright-eyed woman in a red scarf, midlife, her hand resting on his chest. Another photo beneath it showed them sitting on a couch, marathon on TV, her pointing at the screen. "One day you'll run one, old bones and all." He had laughed then, but he'd promised. Quietly, after she passed, he laced up a memory more tightly than his shoes. Those shoes, by the way, weren't just old. They were patched with care, soles glued more times than he could count. The laces had been replaced with mismatched strings. And still, he trained. Mostly at night, when no one would see. Up and down the block, past the same broken fence and flickering streetlight. People thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But something in him needed to finish what she believed he could start. His days were stitched together with humble labor. A janitor at night, sweeping floors in a nearby office building where no one learned his name. A weekend security shift at a local storage lot, where teenagers mocked the way he read the rule sheet like it still meant something. He never snapped back, just tipped his cap and returned to his little stool by the gate. And even in that solitude, he gave. When Mrs. Romero down the hall had to pick up a double shift, it was Walter who watched her 6-year-old grandson. He didn't ask. He just showed up with a worn deck of cards and 2 chipped mugs of cocoa. They never talked about why the boy didn't have a father around. Walter just taught him how to shuffle without cheating. Nobody saw him. Not really. He was the kind of man the world passes by while scrolling headlines or rushing to work. But Walter's quiet was not empty. It was full of small promises kept, like the one in that photograph, where her scarf was now looped through the handle of his closet, waiting for race day. A reminder that sometimes a man runs not for trophies, but to keep a memory warm. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. "Walter, your heart's got miles on it, and it's not getting any younger. If you want to be around next winter, you've got to move more. Walk, stretch, dance, I don't care. But if you stay still, your ticker won't." Walter had nodded politely, tucking the printout of his blood pressure numbers into his coat pocket, already worn thin at the elbows. But it wasn't fear that got him moving. Not really. It was what happened 2 nights later. He was pushing a mop through the dull hum of an after-hours office, his reflection stretched in the polished floors, when a TV left on in the break room caught his eye. A commercial flashed, the city's annual charity marathon, running for tomorrow, raising money for underfunded youth centers and local medical outreach. Kids were shown laughing, doctors tending to them, little hearts on the screen beating in animated rhythms. Walter paused, mop still in hand. His breath caught as the screen faded to the image of the race banner fluttering in golden light. The timing was sharp, cruel, or maybe perfect. He remembered her voice, his wife, soft, teasing. "You? A marathon? You'll trip over your own knees. But I pay money to see you try." And then she'd kissed his cheek and added, "Promise me, someday, just for the fun of it." He hadn't. Not then. But now. The next morning, he found a crumpled flyer near the community board outside the corner shop. Same race. Same promise staring back at him. The entry fee wasn't small. He counted the bills twice. Not enough. So he walked back home, opened the old wooden box where he kept her wedding ring and a few small keepsakes, and chose the antique pocket watch he'd kept since his father passed. A pawn shop took it. $50. Enough to register. Training began like failure. He couldn't make it a block without resting. Kids laughed. Cars honked. "Go home, Grandpa," someone once shouted. But he didn't stop. He went out early, before the world was fully awake. By week 3, the man at the donut shop began refilling his bottle without being asked. A delivery boy on a bike started yelling, "Go, old man, go," every Tuesday. And though his legs trembled and his knees ached, Walter kept running. Not fast, not well, but forward. This race wasn't about medals. It was a promise to the past. And, though he didn't know it yet, a thread pulling him into a future far beyond his imagination. Race morning arrived wrapped in gray mist and restless nerves. Walter stood in front of his mirror, more rusted frame than glass, and pinned bib number 7461 to the chest of his faded cotton shirt. It sagged slightly, a little too big, the color long lost to time and wash cycles. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from stiffness that never quite went away anymore. He pulled on his patched sneakers, double-knotted them the way he always had, then tucked a small folded photo of his wife into the lining of his sock. Not for luck, full grounding. Outside, the energy buzzed. Loud music, neon shirts, high-performance shoes, shiny water packs, and headbands promising speed and sweat control. Walter shuffled to the starting area, a quiet shadow among sleek bodies bouncing on their toes, doing warm-ups that looked more like dance routines than stretches. He looked down at his own knees, already sore. Someone nearby chuckled. "Hope there's a medic at mile 2, a young man joked. Walter heard it, said nothing. Near the front, Lena adjusted her high-end smartwatch, its metallic strap gleaming. Her sleek ponytail caught the morning light as her friends snapped selfies and made jokes about setting PRS and racking up likes. None of them saw Walter. Not really. He didn't exist in their world. The announcer boomed through speakers, thanking corporate sponsors, welcoming influencers, shouting out names of charity donors. But not his. Walter just stepped back, blinked slowly, and exhaled. He wasn't here for cameras. The horn blasted. He moved. By mile 5, the crowd thinned. Walter was near the back, but not last. Yet, at mile 10, the cramp behind his thigh screamed like it wanted to sit down and never stand again. He pressed 2 fingers into the knot, hobbled forward. "Come on now," he whispered to no one. Mile 15. A child held out a hand for a high five. Walter tapped it. The kid cheered like he touched a legend. At 18, the sun was full in the sky, the shade gone, and Walter's breath had become sandpaper. He saw people quitting, legs giving out. Stretchers rolled past him. Still, he moved. Every few minutes, her voice echoed in his head. "You'll trip over your own knees." He smiled at that. "But I'd pay money to see you try." His socks were wet. His left shoe rubbed raw at the heel. A young runner zipped past, music blasting through earbuds, not even glancing at the old man dragging his bones up a tiny hill that felt like Everest. He paused once, at a water station, hands trembling as he lifted the paper cup. A volunteer asked if he was okay. "Can't stop now," Walter whispered. "She'll never let me hear the end of it." Mile 20. The noise had faded behind him. There were no more bands playing. No cheer squads. Only the faint sound of an ambulance in the far distance, maybe attending to someone up ahead. And then, mile 23, where time would stop for someone else, but only because Walter did. He was almost there. Almost. By the time Walter reached mile 23, the world had narrowed to sound and color. His vision pulsed at the edges. The finish line banner flickered far ahead like a mirage, close enough to believe in, far enough to hurt. Every step felt borrowed. That's when the scream cut through the noise. It wasn't loud at first, just sharp, panicked. He looked up and saw her, Lena, staggering sideways, her stride breaking apart like glass. One hand clutched her chest. The other reached for balance that wasn't there. She fell hard, twisting as she went down, breath knocked clean out of her. A ripple moved through the runners behind her. A few cursed. Someone swerved wide. Most kept going. Their watches buzzed. Their goals were still alive. Walter stopped. For half a second, just half, everything inside him argued. This was it. The thing he promised. Proof. A finish line photo he could keep even if no one else did. He thought of the years people had looked past him, of being called old, useless, done. Then he saw her lips turning pale. He knelt, slower than he wanted, faster than his body liked. "Hey," he said, voice raw. He remembered what his wife once taught him after a long hospital shift. Check breathing. Don't panic. He tilted her head gently, felt the flutter of air. Too shallow. He waved, shouted, stayed. When medics arrived, one squeezed his shoulder. Good call, she said. Then they were gone. Walter stood. The course was empty now. Glory had moved on. He finished anyway. No cheers. No camera. Just a volunteer handing him a wrinkled bottle of water and a tired smile. Walter drank and walked home, thinking it was over. He was wrong. 2 days after the marathon, Walter sat in his usual spot, the sagging chair by the small window that looked out onto his patch of broken sidewalk. His legs still ached in places he didn't know could ache, and his joints made the kind of noise that warned him not to stand too quickly. He sipped weak tea, counted coins into piles, rent, bread, maybe enough for half a bottle of his heart medication. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired and quiet. The kind of quiet no one ever interrupted. Until they did. The hum of engines arrived first, low and out of place on his old street. Walter leaned forward, squinting through the curtain. 3 black cars. Long, sleek, outstepped suits. Polished shoes landing awkwardly on cracked pavement. A young woman emerged slowly, aided by a man. Her steps cautious, her face familiar now. It was her. Lena. The knock was steady, respectful. Walter opened the door in his old sweater, the one with the threadbare elbows and tea stains. He stood uncertainly as Lena smiled, eyes glassy. Behind her, a tall man extended a hand. "Mr. Wallace," he asked. "My name is David Callan, Lena's father. You saved my daughter's life." Walter blinked. "I just stopped." "And that made all the difference," the man said softly. "The doctors said if you hadn't acted when you did." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. He handed Walter a folded letter. "We had to track you down through race records. Took longer than it should have." Walter opened it slowly, hands trembling, not from nerves, but disbelief. Inside was an offer. No fanfare, no press, just dignity, full medical coverage, a safe apartment in a senior-friendly community, a modest monthly stipend, a part-time advisory role at a foundation supporting low-income seniors and first-time runners, and, at Lena's insistence, a charitable fund in Walter's name. The Wallace promise, for anyone who just needs a little help to keep moving forward. He looked up, stunned. "Why all this?" Lena stepped closer. "Because you didn't run past me when everyone else did." Walter smiled, the kind of smile that only comes after years of being unseen. This time, someone saw him. Spring came softer than usual that year. Not warmer, just gentler. The kind of air that doesn't fight you when you breathe it. Walter walked slower these days, but not because of pain. Just peace. His new apartment had steady heat, a working stove, and a medicine cabinet that no longer required choosing which pills he could afford. On the wall above his modest table hung a new photo. Lena, smiling beside him at last year's marathon, her medal shining, his cap crooked on his head. They weren't family by blood, but some bonds run deeper. The marathon had changed, not in size, but in heart. Each year now, a small silver plaque was given to one runner, not for time, but for spirit. The Wallace Award. Walter presented it himself, standing near the starting line in his crisp volunteer vest, offering quiet words to nervous first-timers. Lena visited often, hugging him without words, sometimes with her father, who rarely left without telling someone nearby, "This man saved more than just my daughter." That morning, an older woman stood at the back of the starting line, hands shaking, unsure. Walter approached and gently pressed his old race bib into her palm. "The finish line," he said, voice warm, "isn't what you think it is." And as she stepped forward, a story rippled outward, one that began with a man the world never saw. A man who ran not for glory, but for someone else, and changed more lives than he ever knew.